Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sask Power's second call-in show on nuclear power in Saskatchewan. We're reaching out to folks across the province tonight, so thank you to everyone joining us over the phone and online. My name is Kevin Powers, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Together, we'll dig into some big questions about nuclear power from small modular reactors, or SMRs, and what it could mean for Saskatchewan. Before we dive in, I'd like to introduce Darcy Holderness, the Manager of Nuclear Engineering, Construction, and Project Delivery at Sask Power, who will provide us with a land acknowledgement. Over to you, Darcy.
Thanks, Kevin. I'd like to start by just acknowledging that Sask Power's business stretches right across Saskatchewan, and so that reaches the ancestral lands of many nations, and that includes nations on treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, and also the Dakota and Métis nations. As a company, we respect and honor the ancestral homes of Saskatchewan's Indigenous peoples, and we're committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation. All of us here at Sask Power today are coming to you from Treaty 4, and that encompasses the lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis. And just a personal note, as part of this nuclear development project, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in the communities with a lot of the nations that live and work and play around the Estevan and the sites that we've been considering. And it's really been a valuable experience for me and a special part of the project, and it's progressing my own journey down that need for truth and reconciliation. And so I'm really thankful for that. Back to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Darcy. Now, we'll be hearing more from Darcy later in the call. But to kick things off, here's what I'm hoping to cover tonight. First, I want to understand, why is Saskatchewan considering nuclear power now? What's changed, and what needs to change? Next, I want to know how Sask Power is picking the final site to potentially host the SMR. Is there a checklist or a set of criteria that Sask Power is following? What else is involved up until construction of a potential SMR facility? That's what I want to know. But of course, tonight is also about your questions too. This is your chance to ask what's on your mind, and we'll do our best to get you the answers you're looking for. To help answer our questions tonight, I'm joined by three guests from Sask Power who've been deep in the work of evaluating nuclear power for Saskatchewan over the last few years. First, I'd like to introduce Nanette Solomon, who's the Manager of Supply Planning at Sask Power. Nanette and her team are responsible for managing Sask Power's current and future power supply plans. Hello, Nanette, and welcome.
Hello, Kevin. It's great to be here tonight.
Next, we have Sarah Klein-Bentley, a Senior Supply Planning Engineer who's responsible for finding the site to potentially host an SMR. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Kevin. Looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And you've already met Darcy Holderness. He'll be sharing some of his knowledge around the reactor technology that Sask Power has selected, timelines for constructing, and ongoing work happening to prepare for the potential development of nuclear power from an SMR. Thanks for being here, Darcy. Before we get to your questions, though, on the line, I've got a question for the audience. We have several thousand callers on the line right now, and I'd like to take a poll to see where everyone's calling in from. Here's the question. In May, Sask Power announced that they're exploring two sites near the city of Estevan in the southeast corner of the province to potentially host the province's first SMR facility. Now here's where you come in. Answering the question's easy. Just use the number pad on your phone. Press 1 if you're joining us from the southeast corner of the province, in or near Weyburn, Estevan, or Stoughton, for example. Press 2 if you're joining us from somewhere else in the province, and press 3 if you're connecting from outside of the province. Throughout the event, we'll be posing a few more poll questions, We really appreciate your participation. While we wait for the results, let's run through how you can ask questions throughout the discussion this evening. It's pretty simple. If you'd like to ask your question live on the air, simply press *3. An operator will take down your question and put you in a queue. You'll still be able to hear the conversation while you're waiting. When I call your name, you'll be able to ask your question live on the air. If you prefer not to ask your question on the air, you can submit it to be read and answered live by our experts. Now, thanks again to those who participated in the poll. Some of the results are in, so let's take a look. According to the poll, 22% of participants tonight are from Southeast Saskatchewan. 74% are from somewhere else in the province, and 4% are from outside the province. Thank you all for being with us tonight. All right, let's shift gears and dive into the conversation. First, I'd like to invite Nanette to share where Saskatchewan's power currently comes from and why this is changing. Over to you, Nanette.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Right now, Saskatchewan has a variety of electricity generation sources. A good mix is important to ensure the electricity is there when you turn the lights on. And today, that mix includes hydro, wind, solar, coal, and gas. Coal is roughly 24% of our generating capacity, while about 39% comes from natural gas. Combined, that's about 63% of our power. Burning coal and gas releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Countries, provinces, and states are moving away from coal and gas to electricity sources that don't emit greenhouse gases. As a result, the electricity landscape around the world is changing. And why does this need to change? Well, we recognize the impact of climate change on our operations and the need to change. And in many cases, many of our customers are asking us to change. Federal regulations are also increasingly encouraging change to meet net zero greenhouse gas emission targets. Net zero means we need to achieve a balance where carbon emitted into the atmosphere is equal to the carbon removed from it. This can be achieved by cutting greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible and finding ways to remove or offset remaining emissions. Every province, including Saskatchewan, has a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At SAS Power, our goal is to reduce these emissions by at least 50% from 2005 levels by 2030, and to get to net zero from power generation by 2050 or sooner. To achieve this goal, we need a balanced mix of power sources that allow us to continue to provide our customers with reliable, sustainable, and cost-effective power while increasing the amount of power we generate and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions.
So is this where nuclear power comes into the picture?
Yes, and I'd say it's an emerging picture. I think one of the biggest takeaways as we look to the future of power in our province is that we need a variety of low and non-carbon emitting technologies that we can rely on. To meet this need, our 2025 draft long-term supply plan outlines several short and long-term recommended actions. We included Saskatchewan people in the process to help us develop these recommendations. Engaging our customers along each step of the planning process ensures that as we go through this energy transition, our customers have input into the direction we're taking. One of the short-term recommendations, and by short-term I'm talking about the next 5 years, is to conclude the planning phase for the first SMR project that is currently underway, leading to a final investment decision in 2029 and a potential in-service date in 2034. Looking longer term, we need to assess additional future nuclear generation supply options, including additional SMRs, advanced reactors, and maybe even larger nuclear reactors. Ultimately, the answer to these questions will depend on whether or not we can ensure cost-effective, reliable power for Saskatchewan homes and businesses. We're also watching other jurisdictions around the world carefully to better understand this question.
Interesting. Thanks, Nanette. Could you give us an overview of why nuclear power from SMRs could be a good fit to power the province?
Sure. So first of all, nuclear power is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which means it provides a continuous, reliable source of electricity. It is also emission-free and could help us achieve net zero emissions from electricity production. SMRs are also the right size for our energy needs and infrastructure here in Saskatchewan. The SMR we selected will generate around 300 megawatts of power, producing enough energy to power 300,000 homes, which is similar to the amount of power produced by the Shand coal power station near Estevan. The development, construction, and operation of SMRs would benefit Saskatchewan's economy by generating revenue and creating both temporary and permanent jobs. It would also support Saskatchewan's uranium industry, as uranium is the key element used in the production of nuclear fuel. Modular design means many parts could be assembled off-site, which helps limit construction costs and schedule delays. Other benefits include opportunities for Indigenous partnerships, innovative research and development programs, new education, and training initiatives.
Thanks, Nanette. And I think now is a good time for another poll question to help us understand a little more about your awareness of or participation in SaskPower's Future Power or SMR engagement events. Here's the question. We'd like to know how many of you joining us tonight have participated in one or more of these events. Press 1 if you've participated in one or more Future Power events. Press 2 if you've participated in one or more SMR events. Press 3 if you've participated in both, one or more Future Power and one or more SMR events. And press 4 if this is the first time you've participated in one of SaskPower's engagement events. Now, while we wait for those questions, we're going to take a few questions from the audience. Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question live on the air, press *3. An operator will take your question and put it in a queue. You'll still be able to hear the conversation while you're waiting. When I call your name, you'll be able to ask your question live on the air. Now, if you prefer not to ask your question on the air, you can submit it to be read and answered live by our experts. We have a number of people in the queue, so I'm going to ask Walter Ravitskin from Prince Albert to join
Any size hot or iced coffee. You heard that right.
the call.
Breakfast sandwich with Canada's favorite coffee.
Walter, are you there?
Yeah. Hello.
Hi, Walter. You're on the air. Walter?
The question is, will it help out that nuclear thing there when the power, like say if the power goes out, that goes off when there's thick clouds or snowing or rain? Will that thing help it out or not for the power?
Hi, Walter.
Yeah.
Hi, Walter. This is Nanette. I can take your question. So I think what you're asking is, will nuclear power help with the reliability of our power overall? So are we less likely to see power outages, how our lights go off, versus other sources of power? And that's true. Nuclear power is a very stable, reliable source of power. And so, for example, wind can only provide power when the wind's blowing. The sun can only provide power when the sun's shining, and it will go down if there's clouds going overhead, as you mentioned. So nuclear power is one of those sources that we can rely on, as I mentioned, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Great question.
Thanks, Nanette. And thanks for the question. For the next question, I'd like to turn it to Jeremiah, who's calling in from Regina. Jeremiah, you're on the air. Hi, Jeremiah. Do we have you there? Doesn't sound like Jeremiah is on the line. In which case, I'd like to ask Mary from Saskatoon to join us on the call. Mary, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Why do we need nuclear power?
Hi, Mary.
Yeah,
It's
that's
Nanette
all.
again. Yeah, that's also a good question. So we need a mix of different types of power, and we've been adding, for example, wind and solar power to help bring down our greenhouse gas emissions, because right now most of our power comes from coal and natural gas, which has a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and the wind and solar help to reduce that. But as we try to get to really almost zero greenhouse gas emissions, we need new sources of power that can still be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And nuclear power is one of those technologies that can provide that power. There are other options that we can look to, but this is a great option for Saskatchewan that we're investigating. And this is a source of high interest for Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Nanette, and thanks for your questions. While we are going through your questions, the results of our poll have come in. The question again was, have you attended any of the following Sask Power engagement events? 9% of you have joined future power supply engagement events. 4% have joined SMR engagement events. 5% have joined both, and 82% of you are joining us for the first time. So thank you. If you've joined us just now, my name is Kevin Powers, and I'm hosting tonight's call-in event to discuss the potential for nuclear power from small modular reactors, or SMRs, in Saskatchewan. Now I'd like to turn it over to Sask Power's nuclear development team, who's working towards selecting a site for the province's first SMR. Sarah, you're the lead engineer responsible for finding the site to host this potential SMR. Can you tell us where you're at in terms of selecting a site or location for the province's first potential SMR?
Yeah, sure, Kevin. Well, as you mentioned earlier, in May of this year, we made significant progress in our search for a potential host site for the province's first SMR facility. We announced 2 potential candidate sites in the Estevan area, so one on the Boundary Dam Reservoir and the other on the Rafferty Reservoir. These site selections came from extensive technical research, a consultation with rights holders in the Estevan area, as well as engagement with Indigenous peoples, the public, and municipal leaders. Now we're in the process of studying these 2 sites in even greater detail through technical, environmental, social and cultural, and economic studies. And we expect to make a final site selection next year.
How are you going to decide between the 2 sites?
Well, the 2 sites in the Estevan area both rank high in terms of their technical suitability. They were also selected because of their proximity to a city. So the city of Estevan has access to existing services, a skilled workforce, accommodations, emergency services, as well as infrastructure, roads, and transmission. So it's going to be hard to pick between the 2. We still have a lot of work to do. And so as you can imagine, a lot of due diligence is involved in the process of selecting a final site to host the SMR facility. As I mentioned earlier, we've been consulting with rights holders and engaged Indigenous peoples and municipal leaders and communities in the Estevan region to ensure their unique perspectives are being brought to the table as part of our siting decision. We've completed several detailed environmental and technical studies, such as geotechnical drilling to help confirm whether the site's ground can support an SMR facility. We also completed environmental investigations, water field studies, and archaeological studies to ensure we avoid or minimize our impact to sensitive lands and habitats. We're currently evaluating the data from these studies to help inform our final siting decision next year. We've also started to look at the 2 sites from a construction perspective to determine where the SMR facility could go, so where the water intake and return infrastructure might go, and comparing the opportunities and risk trade-offs for each site.
Now, it sounds like you've got your hands full with these two sites, Sarah. When we last spoke, though, the Elbow region near Lake Diefenbaker was in the mix. Are you still considering this area?
While we aren't pursuing the Elbow region for the SMR project we're currently advancing, it remains an attractive option for the development of nuclear power. So we plan to continue exploring it for potential future development.
Thanks, Sarah. Now, I've previously heard that a half section of land, or about 320 acres, is the target size you're looking for to build the facility on. Now, if SMRs are the size of a Walmart superstore or a football field, why do you need so much land?
Yeah, that's correct. We're looking to secure a half section or 320 acres of land for a couple of reasons. So first, we need to ensure we have adequate space for construction of the facility. So for example, we'll need to have enough land to store equipment on, places for construction crews to eat, have meetings, and park their vehicles. We also want to ensure that we have enough space for flexibility in terms of the actual site layout. So while our project is focused on building one SMR, we want to ensure that the site we would find is suitable for a second SMR as well.
Thanks for explaining that, Sarah. That makes sense. Now, I want to turn to the audience for questions, but before I do that, I'd like to do another poll. And what I'd like to know this time from those of you joining us tonight is how aware you are of Sask Power's nuclear SMR project. Press 1 if you're very aware of the project and have been following along for quite some time. Press 2 if you're somewhat aware of the project or have heard a little bit about it. Press 3 if you know the project exists, but not much more than that. And press 4 if you are completely unaware of the project and this is the first time you're hearing about it. As we wait for the answers to come in, why don't we take a few more questions? We have quite a few people in the queue. First off, I'd like to turn it over to Peter from Saskatoon. Peter, you're on the air.
Good evening. And this question is probably best directed at Sarah. And my question is, based on the prime reason for these small modular nuclear reactors is to reduce greenhouse gases, why is the selection of the site near Estevan rather than near the cities of Saskatoon or Regina, where the majority of that power is going to be used? Because currently Estevan has some of the highest concentration of coal, but also wind power. And we're going to have significant line losses for using that power. So why was not a location close to one of the major cities selected? Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So I guess just going back a bit, when we initially looked at the entire province, we kind of looked at the entire province from a regional perspective. And that's not to just say that Estevan or the area of Elbow are the only areas that can support nuclear. These areas were preferred based on their proximity to a body of water that could support the SMR, an existing workforce that could be there, and the infrastructure, so transmission services in the area. So that's kind of where we were focused on the two preferred areas where we started. The reason for the Estevan area being selected is, really over the Elbow area is just to reiterate, we can leverage and build on the existing regional services that are there and the infrastructure, such as that, the workforce, accommodations, the roads, transmission, emergency services, which is a significant benefit when we're talking about our first nuclear project. So that is why the Estevan area was preferred.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we've got a written question that I'll ask you, Sarah. And that question is, why is it such a slow and long process to site and build an SMR? And the follow-up is, can we get it sooner?
I would say So, I mean, the first step is selecting a site, and then we have a very long regulatory process to go through. So, we'll have to, right now we're preparing to submit our initial project description to the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. That is happening probably in 2025 here, and then we have to go through a licensing process through the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So there's quite a few licenses that we have to go through, and then so by 2029 we'll have gone through the impact assessment process, and then we'll have gone through the license to prepare a site, and that's just only gets us to a place where construction can begin, assuming if we get approval to move forward with the site in 2029. So no, the answer is no, we cannot move any sooner than we are now.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to move to another question, and this one is from Tom, who's calling in from Regina. Tom, can you hear me? You're on the air.
Yes, I can. Thanks for taking my call. It's a cradle to grave question. So, assuming that the SMR is using radioactive rods, what are the options that you're looking at for the grave portion? So, with your spent rods, where are you planning on storing those or disposing those? What are your ideas?
Okay, so I can try to answer this question, but it might be better answered by one of my colleagues here. But I'll give it a shot here. So the spent rods are fuel. There's a process that happens with our used fuel. So the used fuel comes out of the reactor and it's first placed in wet storage for cooling. So after it's cooled, the used fuel is moved to a dry storage on site, and then afterwards it's put into a deep geological repository, and that would be governed through the NWMO, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. And so that is the, I guess, end goal for the useful fuel to go at the end of the day.
All right, thank you. Next, I'll return to written questions, and this one is for Sarah. And the question is, what are the local infrastructure needs for the project? For example, roads, emergency services required, etc.
So, when we're looking at infrastructure, nearby highway infrastructure, heavy haul roads to support construction, nearby emergency services are a benefit, such as fire, police, security, hospital services. There will most likely be emergency services on site as well. Also, infrastructure with respect to the accommodations for our workforce as well. Those are all things that are kind of the needs for the project, and probably much more.
All right, thank you for that, Sarah, and thanks for all of the questions. Now, while we are answering these questions, the poll results are in, and according to the poll, 15% of people on the line are very aware of the SMR project and have been following along. 31% are somewhat aware. 31% also knew the project existed, but not much more. And 23% were unaware, and this is the first time they've heard of it. So thanks to everyone for answering. Now, I want to turn over the questions to Darcy. Now, Darcy, Sask Power selected the GE Hitachi BWRX 300 as the technology of choice to proceed with for SMRs. Can you tell us about this technology and why it's a good fit for Saskatchewan?
Yeah, you bet, Kevin. So we selected this technology, the GE Hitachi BWRX 300, as the preferred design after a multi-year process of looking at all the SMRs out there and slowly shortlisting down to this one. Now, that name sounds technical, but BWR simply means boiling water reactor, and that's just the type of the nuclear power plant. And it means that the steam generation process happens right in the core of the reactor. The X is for the Roman numeral 10. And what that means is it's the 10th generation of a boiling water reactor technology that's been developed by GE Hitachi. And finally, that 300 at the end is about the output. It's the nominal output of the reactor. So about 300 megawatts of power is produced from each reactor. And that's about enough power to electrify 300,000 homes, the same size as our big coal plants and some of our new natural gas facilities in Saskatchewan. So it's that right fit like Nanette was talking about. Now, there are lots of these boiling water reactors actively operating in North America and around the world today. And this SMR builds off of that technology. A lot of the similar operating principles in those larger conventional reactors exist in this SMR version. And it's the exact same fuel. So it's just smaller in size, which makes a lot of sense for our grid. And these newer designs do have a lot of advanced safety systems as well.
Okay, so it's a proven technology and it's the right size. But are there others like it that are already operating?
Already operating like this one, the answer is no. This scaled down version has not been put into operation yet. But another reason that we selected it is that it's the same technology that Ontario Power Generation, or OPG as we call them, selected for their project out at a site called the Darlington site just outside of Toronto on Lake Ontario. It's the site of an existing nuclear power plant in Canada. And OPG is one of the largest nuclear operating companies in North America. So they're currently preparing that site for construction of up to 4 of the BWRX 300 SMRs. And they have a target to have the first reactor in operation by 2029, which is right around when we're expecting to make our final investment decision on whether we proceed with the construction or not in Saskatchewan. So, seeing them build that facility in Canada under the same regulator, which is the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, it allows us to gain a lot of insights, and it helps us understand things like cost, how they intend to staff and operate the facility, and a lot more. And learning from their experience and their project, it will really help us plan effectively and make informed decisions for us in Saskatchewan.
Okay, I want to go back to what you said a little earlier. You mentioned that the GE Hitachi SMR design had advanced safety systems. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. I mean, nuclear technology in Canada has been operating for a long time. It's roughly 70 years, in fact. And there's a very strong track record of protecting people and the environment. And that's based on large conventional designs. These newer designs, they lean into what you call inherent or passive safety systems. And that's those advanced safety features. And they're structured with a defense in depth, which keeps people and the environment safe. Now, those terms are still pretty technical, so I'll try to explain a little bit more. When you say defense in depth, it involves multiple layers of safety measures that protect against accidents or failures and keep the radiation under control and contained. And the reactor stays in a safe state. That's like, wearing belts and suspenders on your pants and then another completely different set of belt and suspenders in case that first set breaks. Because there are issues with systems infrastructure at times. And there's a lot of specific rules and guidelines that the regulators look at very closely to ensure that there's no single point of failure that could compromise the overall safety case of the facility. That's like all the 2 sets of suspenders can't be tied to one button on your pants. You need 2 different buttons, and they each have to be sewn on in a different way with a different thread, that type of thing. And so that's defense in depth. Now, these inherent or passive safety systems, they're designed to ensure the safety of the nuclear reactor remains intact without relying on what we call active controls. And those are things like human action or external power sources. So the BWRX 300, it has a natural circulation system in place where you don't actually need any power or pumps or any human interaction to cool the reactor if it needs to shut itself down for any reason. There's no human intervention required for many days, and that's a next level of safety that modern nuclear reactors are offering.
Thanks, Darcy. That's a good explanation. I've just got a couple more questions for you. With the selection of a site next year, what comes next, and when do you expect construction to begin?
Yeah, great question. But selecting a site is a very significant milestone for us on this development project. But there's still a lot of work to do after that before we make a final investment decision on the project, which we're targeting about 2029 to make. And so once the site is selected next year in 2025, we're going to begin that regulatory and licensing process that Sarah mentioned. And that really starts with the impact assessment. So we're going to submit what we call an initial project description to the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. And that's the federal body who's responsible for, they evaluate both the positive and the negative impacts of all potential projects in Canada. And they make sure that the health and safety of people and the environment are intact, and their goal really is to make sure these projects are in the best interest of Canadians. Now, outside of that, the life cycle nuclear regulator in Canada is the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or what we call them, the CNSC. And they're responsible for regulating the use of all nuclear energy and materials right through the life cycle, cradle to grave. And their foundational element is protection of people's health, safety, and the security of these types of operations. And that comes with a lot of unique hazards that nuclear has to be managed very closely. And so they have a series of licenses that we'll need to obtain. The first one is what they call the license to prepare the site. And they're going to do that in conjunction with the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. So it's an evaluation of that site and the project at the same time. So all that work Sarah talked about as getting ready to select the site is to make sure that once we have one, it will successfully evaluate for that first license. And once we have it, we're going to need to collect about 2 years of data on it to fully characterize the site with things like the water specifics, geology, weather risks, that type of thing, and evaluate all of those characteristics to make sure that that site can safely support our two 300 megawatt reactors. And that 2 year period will be followed by a regulatory review period where the regulators look very closely at all that data and evaluation and then make their decision on granting the license or not. And then once we have that site, it means that once we have that license, the site is deemed suitable for the SMR, and we can start the process of preparing it for construction, which would just be clearing vegetation, digging a hole for the foundation of the facility, and maybe bringing in some auxiliary services, the water, gas, and power, that type of thing. And so that kind of leads up to the next big license, which is the license to construct. And that's another one that'll be issued just by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And we need that license in place before we start pouring any concrete, placing equipment, or really building out the facility. And so those two licenses are the two big ones that you need before you really transition into a construction project. And then so outside of all that regulatory and licensing work, we still have a lot of preparatory work to get ready for potential construction in 2029, 2030. And so we have to, develop the design of the site, purchase a lot of long lead equipment like the steam turbine, the reactor pressure vessel, and do a lot of construction planning and supply chain and workforce planning to make sure our project is ready to go.
Well, that's a lot of licenses and a lot of work. Now, Darcy, from what I understand, Sask Power recently established a nuclear subsidiary called Sask Nuclear. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, you bet. So, we just, as I just mentioned, nuclear power is highly regulated by the CNSC, and they have a lot of standards and requirements that are very unique to the nuclear industry. And they're really a lot different from Sask Power's other lines of business and other power generation sources. Oh, excuse me. So establishing this subsidiary dedicated just to our nuclear line of business, our nuclear power projects, is the most efficient way for us to show the CNSC how we're meeting those standards and regulations for this project, and it also helps to kind of separate it from the rest of our more conventional lines of business. So the subsidiary, it's wholly owned by SaskPower. It follows all the same provincial laws and requirements as the Crowns do in Saskatchewan, but it's created just to house all of the nuclear elements of our business going forward. Thanks,
Darcy. And now my final question for you, Darcy, before I turn it over to some more audience questions. There's rightly been a lot of focus and engagement around finding a site for the project. But I'm curious to know what else your team has been working on that's maybe less visible to the public.
Yeah, you bet. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. We have been and we continue to invest in our business. So we're developing different ways of doing business, and that's really with management systems, working on our culture, making sure we're ready to meet the safety and security best practices that align with Canada's existing nuclear industry. We've started to lay the groundwork for things like that nuclear procurement, the supply chain work that we have to do, some of the workforce training strategies for our province. There's going to be a lot of investment needed in people and business in Saskatchewan to get ready for nuclear. And it's maturing us as a company because of this project too. We're tapped in with a lot of what SaskPower does good and does with the conventional lines of business, and then just elevating that to meet nuclear standards. So it's been challenging for us to think differently about how we do business, and it's really been a humbling experience for us.
Thank you, Darcy. Now, for those of you still with us tonight, we've gone through a lot of material, and I know there are a lot of questions in the lineup here, but if there are others who have questions, press *3 on your phone at any time to let us know if you'd like to speak live on the call. If you'd prefer not to ask your question live on the air or have comments or ideas about something that was not addressed in tonight's event, please leave us a message at the end of this call. Now, we do have a number of questions from our callers, so let's get to those now. We will start with Bill, who's calling from Saskatoon. Bill, can you hear me? You're on the air.
Okay, I'm just wondering, when you have to dismantle these down the road, or if you have to, I don't know how long a life expectancy is of them, or there's a problem like over in Chernobyl, what will be, I guess, after that happens, will that land ever be feasible to be used again? And the issue, like you said, of the safety, I know that, but I'm just saying in future, if, say, something like's happening over in the Ukraine right now, a war breaks out and a nuclear war, what's going to happen, and what is the safety factor for life after that given prospect of time?
Good question. Darcy, I'll hand that over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so that speaks to the previous question about managing some of the waste products. The used nuclear fuel, it stays radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years, so it's forever type of a hazardous material. But the volumes of it are quite small. And so before we're allowed to build, before we're granted that license to construct from the CNSC, and this is the same for any type of nuclear project, be it a research reactor, medical isotope production, or anything, if you're creating nuclear liabilities in Canada, the CNSC will want to see a full decommissioning plan right up front. And not only will they want to check it to make sure it's technically sound, we'll have to show them that we have the money in the bank to deal with it, so that they know they have a technical means of decommissioning that site and dealing with all the waste products that are generated, and they've got the money in the bank to deal with it in case that company, it just disappears or something. A lot of those accident scenarios, those security threats, acts of war, that type of thing, are all very, very formally contemplated through the regulatory process, and you have to show how you're going to keep the reactor safe and stable through those situations, and ultimately you have emergency response plans in place as well.
Thanks for that, Darcy. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Amgad, who's calling in from Saskatoon. Amgad, are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm on the line. Yeah. Thanks for the invitation to participate. And I have just quick questions, like 2 questions. The first one is that I agree that the nuclear reactors can work 24/7, which makes them suited to carry the base load of, any big city or things like this. But also there are times in which these nuclear reactors has to be shut down, particularly during, for example, the refueling process or any accident scenario. And when you're talking about 300 megawatt electricity generated from this SMR, so what are the plan of Sask Power to compensate for this loss of power during shutdown? So this is the first question.
Okay, thank you, Amgad. I think, Annette, you're the power planner. Perhaps you might take a crack at this.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Amgad. Basically, we have a power system. So we're not relying on any one power plant to be providing power at any moment. We often have a unit that might have a sudden, maybe a pump issue, and the unit will trip offline. And we've built our system such that other power stations will be able to cover for the loss of that unit. And so that would be the same in the situation where we've planned maintenance on a unit. We will plan to have other generation sources online to cover that.
Yeah.
And Amgad, had a second question?
Yeah, the second question probably is a technical one. So I just have looked at the specs of the PWRX 300 and noticed that it has a very long chimney, which is around something like 30 meters or so, which I assume very important in order to increase the natural circulation of the system. Just my question is whether this chimney is going to be filled with saturated water or with saturated steam. If I can get this answer, I'm not sure if somebody is interested in this or not.
Darcy, I think this sounds like a question for you.
Yeah, you bet. I love it. So the chimney is extended on this boiling water reactor. It's got about an 8-meter chimney, followed by about a 20-meter dehydrator or a steam separator. So it is saturated steam at that point. The steam is generated right below the chimney, and it's saturated steam, and then there's a moisture separator right at the top, and we get dry steam coming out, which we send to the steam turbine like we would in our coal facilities, where we burn coal to produce that steam.
All right. Thanks for that question, and thanks for that answer, Darcy. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Andrew, who's calling from Saskatoon. Andrew, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you. My question relates to the supply chain for enriched uranium, because Canada does not enrich uranium. We are going to rely on the one facility in the United States that provides enrichment. How secure do you think the supply of enriched uranium is going to be? And are there any considerations being given to supporting an enrichment plant in Canada?
Good question, Andrew. Darcy, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, these SMRs do require a low level of enrichment on the uranium, and you're exactly right. We don't enrich uranium in Canada. In fact, we built and designed our own reactors, the CANDU reactors, so that we didn't have to rely on enriched uranium. The SMRs that they're building in Ontario and the one we're considering in Saskatchewan will require some enrichment, but there are options. There's options, more than one option in North America, and there's some options overseas as well to supply that level of enrichment, and then we'll fabricate it into the fuel bundle. So, you know, in the short term, we're content with the number of options that we have and the volumes that we need. You know, you can build a pretty long-term bank of fuel on site without taking much space at all. Long-term, as we look at relying more on advanced or modern designs that require enrichment, it could become more part of our national security in Canada. And there have been some discussions about how and when and what it would take for Canada to enter that area of the nuclear supply chain. So there's short, there's medium and long-term goals, and with where we're at with SMRs in Saskatchewan, we're quite comfortable with the supply chain.
All right, good question and good answer. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Matthew, who's calling from Shaunavon. Matthew, you're on the air.
Well, thank you very much. I've got a two-part question. First of all, I'm wondering if the existing line infrastructure can be used for the SMR production of the 300 megawatts as the coal is shut in or slowed down as we cease the use of coal. And secondly, whether or not the use of storage at our wind and solar sites, similar to what's going to be used at the Colorado Power Pathway, when they build solar or wind, they also build storage areas that make the use of wind and solar much more base load as opposed to up and down. Thank you for that. And I'm glad to see SaskPower is moving in this direction.
Hi, Matthew. Sorry, this is Nanette. I was just going to jump in. I can answer the question on wind and solar storage. So we have just commissioned our first battery energy storage facility in Regina. It's a 20 megawatt, 1 hour battery. So we're using it primarily to help balance things on the transmission system, but also it'll help us to just learn and get familiar with battery energy storage in general. We're looking to potentially expand a bit there. And in the future, we're investigating some longer 4 hour duration batteries. So those would be used to help firm up that wind and solar generation, as you mentioned. And I missed your first question. I'm not sure if that was one for me or.
Sorry about that, Nanette. The caller is no longer live. So why don't we move then to, sorry about that, we'll move then to our next caller, and that is Joe, who's calling in from Regina. Joe, you're on the air.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, I think we're all aware that Canadians don't really know a lot about nuclear reactors, even though we've had them for many years, like you said. I'm curious to why the SMR, because it seems a little short-sighted to me as far as the power output, and not a CANDU style reactor. And why does it take so long? You know, I think we're overdue.
Good questions, Joe. Nanette, do you want to? Okay, sure, Darcy.
Well, I mean, SaskPower has been looking at nuclear energy for a long time, and conventional reactors have been out there. Canada relies on the CANDU reactors heavily for our power right now. You know, 15% of all of Canada's electricity is nuclear power today. The problem with them is the size. So they're in the 7, 8, and today they're around 1,000 megawatts per reactor. And we're a 5,000 megawatt grid in Saskatchewan. So when you have 20% of your power, 1/5 of the total grid coming from one single unit, and that unit does need to come down for whatever reason, the backup is the problem. It makes it uneconomic to have so many eggs in one basket with a small grid. So the SMRs are changing that, and it's making nuclear feasible. We are looking at load growth over the coming decades and how it would take to enable the larger nuclear plants. And so it is something we're constantly looking at, but it's kind of nice to enter in a greenfield jurisdiction with the smaller reactors that make sense for our grid today. And the length of time, it's really regulatory driven. So it's the federal impact assessment process it's a 4 to 5 year process, and you have to get through that once you have a site and you have a project and a technology. And then you need 5 years to build. So it's just what it takes to get big projects going in Canada.
Thank you, Darcy. And we'll take one final question. And this one is from Yogi calling from Saskatoon. Yogi, you're on the air.
Hi. I think this question was asked by Andrew. This was regarding enrichment. But still, I'll go ahead and ask this question. Is the uranium, that'll be used in this unit mined from Saskatchewan? The fuel
Yep. I can, Yogi, yeah. The uranium will come from Saskatchewan. That's a priority for us. Given our vast resources in Saskatchewan, these SMRs are enabling us to consider nuclear with the future of power and the need to reduce emissions in the province. And it will build off of that resource. So the uranium will come from Saskatchewan mines, but then it will be sent out of country to be enriched and processed into fuel and then come back in the fuel form that we can load into the reactor, which are solid form pellets that are the exact same that's loaded into the large conventional reactors today. Yeah, thank you for that.
And thank you, Darcy, and thank you, Yogi, and thanks to everyone who's joined us here tonight. This has been a great event, and I'm glad we were able to speak with so many people from across the province. But before we go, we have one last poll. We'd like to know if you felt the information provided tonight was useful to you. This one's easy. Press 1 for yes, press 2 for no, press 3 for somewhat, and press 4 for unsure. And please let us know if you want to stay up to date with Sask Power's small modular reactor development project. If you do, please go to saskpower.com/nuclear. To find more information on other events or sign up for an SMR newsletter, go to saskpower.com/engage. And remember, you can stay on the line to leave us a message. Thank you all once again for joining us. Have a great evening. This is the end of the call. Thank you.